Hello, everybody. Today I have another guest speaker. Um, Introduce yourself, who you are, like your name, how you know me, and what you're considered as religiously wise.
Okay. My name is Tyler Murphy, and I know you because I've contributed to your existence. And I consider myself agnostic.
Okay, you here, folks. This is my father. So last time I had my mom, who was a Christian, come on, and I asked her some questions. She didn't know any of the questions beforehand, and I'm doing the same thing here today with my dad, who is not Christian. He is agnostic, and he is also going to be asked some questions that he does not know beforehand. So we like to keep the rules fair here. Okay, so the first question is why don't you, or what made you decide to not follow any specific religion?
Um, I don't think it's a matter of like something making me as much as it is that just kind of like I think we are our behavior in the people that we become, is more of an existential kind of philosophical approach, right? Like this idea that people aren't born to be a certain way; they just become that way through a sequence of like their choices and life experiences, right? And so it's a matter of making choices and being held accountable for those choices. And so throughout like a whole sequence of like life events, things that have occurred in my life, um, I just got to the point to where like um, it seems to me that uh, a, it's not really a matter of belief. It's just a matter of like what is. And so, in order for me to be able to kind of like fully invest in something, I have to kind of have a firm understanding of what something is, and I just never really got to that point.
Alrighty. Okay, next question. Um, if if you are, which religion would you or are you leaning towards being the most believable and why?
So, like of like all
All
religions, like which one's
religions.
the most believable?
Yeah, which one would you consider to be the most believable
Well,
or and why?
sure. Like because I think because when people look at like there's this understanding of like what belief is, right? And belief is a matter of like kind of like how you kind of like contribute yourself to something regardless of circumstance, right? Like if you, whatever you believe, it doesn't matter if there's evidence or not evidence. It doesn't matter if other people believe or what. That's the foundation of belief, right? And so it's not. I wouldn't see it as being more like any religion being more believable than any other religion. For me, it'd have to be like the philosophical consequence of following the religion. So, what is it like philosophically speaking that these different religions are saying that kind of make them, I guess, more believable or would maybe attract me to them? Um, there's elements of Christianity um, that certainly like philosophically, valid, make sense. This idea of like kind of loving others, providing to people who are less fortunate. This idea of not lying because in a society built upon lies, right? Like you know, we can't trust the people around us. We can't establish what is trust. And to that degree, what truth would even really be. So, um, there's a whole bunch of things that are involved with that type of situation where if I'm going to believe in a religion over another, it's more along the lines of like what kind of philosophical like principles it offers, more so than like the spiritualism of it. Um, I would say that Christianity, in that sense, would kind of fall in line with me. Buddhism as well would kind of would I find pretty attractive in that sense. And Christianity and Buddhism aren't really don't have a lot of differences also in that regard. Um, but it's not a matter of belief; it's more of a matter of like the philosophical principles there.
Right. Okay, so the next one um, is, since agnostic, right, is like believing in a higher power technically, but not sure what.
Mm-hmm.
Um, since you believe that there's like a higher power in a sense, do you have an idea of how the creation of the world happened, or like what do you think?
So like I think what's interesting about kind of having this that idea, right? Of there's this deity that has created all things. You know, I think there's no real firm evidence in that to definitively say that's a real event, right? That's something that happened. That something said presto and it became, right? But there is evidence and there are elements of truth that kind of to a degree can atone for that, right? Like because if you look at like this idea of the Big Bang, right? Like during the Big Bang, uh, elements didn't exist and matter didn't quite really exist, and there was no gravity, there was no like all of these things that we know to be a part of reality didn't really exist in that sense. So it's essentially you're looking at everything coming from nothing, right? At least at a surface level knowledge of that kind of thing. So I can certainly see where people are coming from in terms of being like, well, certainly God created all things and presto, there it was. But there's also, I think, an element of it that's like often ignored or not considered, perhaps maybe not ignored, but at least not part of the conversation as it probably should be. And that is this idea that like perhaps maybe it just didn't work out that way. That God lives on a separate timeline. When you are this, omnipresent entity that's like a forever thing. Um, you may say that you created, you know, the world and this and that in this day and that day, but on a human scale, a day could be trillions of years, right? Like so, um, it's very difficult to definitively say that all things were created within a week and then you spent the last day resting, right? Like, um, I would say that given the fact that there's no evidence of how all things came to be, and yet you can't necessarily prove a non-existence of God because like people get caught up in like, well, there's no evidence that God exists, therefore he doesn't. But that's not true. That's not a true thing, right? Like no evidence doesn't mean evidence of none. And so you can't definitively say that God does not exist in any way at all whatsoever. You can't prove a negative. So in that sense, it's within the realm of possibility that there could be a God and that God did just kind of snap his fingers and all things came to exist. And it's within that same realm of possibility, within reason, that in doing so, that is the Big Bang, right? And so it's not a matter of creationism being not being true. It's just a matter of what can we dig into to find where that truth is, right? And so that's kind of where I'm at. I think it is within the realm of possibility that there could be a God that has done something like that for sure.
Okay, have you ever wanted to or have studied theology or any religious books?
Um. So yeah. So I have studied other religious, books, studies, principles, things like that. Um. As far as trying to kind of participate in them or join them, it's even fewer than that. But I think the greater appeal for a lot of them is just kind of like those philosophical principles, right? Because those are things that are actually tangible and that you can apply to, right? Like you can apply those things to real life. The spiritual parts, those are an inner you thing, and that's the only thing that it really focuses on is you and what things mean to you, right? But those philosophical principles, are things that you can participate in that helps society as a whole. And so that's really the kind of thing that I've kind of attached to in all of those.
Have you ever prayed? And if so, why and to who?
Yeah, I've I have prayed only to God. There's been tons of times where I've prayed and participated in praying, and I've gone to church and things like that. And I feel like at times, like when you are agnostic, there's a tremendous amount of people that don't really see, they kind of see that as more of a rejection, right? And it's not a rejection of God or anything. So it's totally within the realm of possibility for somebody like myself to engage in the act of prayer, right? Um, Especially considering that there's this idea of what's called an agnostic theist. An agnostic theist is somebody who actually believes in God. They just also recognize that there's no evidence for a God, which actually, from my perspective, makes it the purest form of like Christianity in that sense, because you understand that there are those underlying problems of, well, I can't prove that God exists. I just simply believe that God exists. So it's a faith based circumstance, right?
Right.
So, but yeah, as far as like praying, absolutely. I've done that before.
All right. Have you had any good experiences with people who say that they believe in Christ?
Yeah, I've had loads of great experiences with people, and I feel like there's a bit of humanism that's lost in a lot of these faith-based conversations, right? Like people expect you that if you claim to be a Christian, they expect you to be a Christian, which doesn't sound unreasonable until you start to realize that what they mean is for you to absolutely behave in a certain manner. And if you go beyond that sense of behavior, then you're a hypocrite, right? And that you're hypocritical. But we're all human, and human behavior is, that's a strange egg to crack, right? And so you can't really put um that onto humanity. And so certainly, just as how there's a lot of nice people who, you know I just don't get along with, right? There's a lot of like Christian people who have been terrible to me. But in my experience, have encountered a vast majority of Christians are great people and have been enjoyable experiences. So that doesn't speak to the religion, that speaks to the people.
Right.
Mhm.
So with that answer, what aspects of them or their actions or words come off as being a good person to you?
What comes off as being a good person is just how much you're willing to kind of just give credit to the humanity of people, right? Like that you recognize that in your life, in the circumstances of which your life has kind of like played on, right? Um, has put you onto the path of being a Christian, you know? But for some people that hasn't been the case. And there are people who are Christians, I think merely just simply because they were just born into it and raised that way. So they just don't know any different, right? And um so in regards to like kind of some of these things, it's just as long as you have your faith, and that faith enables you to be um, a, a greater humanitarian for others, regardless of what their belief foundation is, right? I think that's a great starting point for being what would constitute as a good Christian. And And I think society, especially right now, I think society is kind of like struggling with that Christian identity. They believe. I think there's a current within our society where they believe that if you're a Christian, you have to behave this way. That's not that's not necessarily true, because if that was true, then why do you have all these different denominations of Christianity that allow for all sorts of different circumstances and rules within the confines of their belief system, right? So that's not true. And as long as people are just allowing support for each individual humanity, I think that's the greater story to be told.
Okay, this is the very last question. And it is, do you think it's objectively wrong to believe in a higher power? Why or why not?
No, no, there's no. And that's probably like the most like, and I'm not saying that your question is absurd, right? But it's an absurdity. Okay, like it's an absurdity, and the reason why it's an absurdity is because for you to say that it's objectively wrong means that otherwise, right? That means that you have a special knowledge into what is right. And in order for that to really happen, you have to have something definitive, some sort of empirical evidence by which you can say, nope, you are wrong because of this, right? And you cannot, and this is what agnosticism is. If you are agnostic, it's not saying that God doesn't exist. It's just saying that you have no idea. And that's simply because there's just no evidence for God. And I get that where Christians are coming from. Christians will be like, oh, yeah, sure, because we have Bethlehem, that's a real place, and Jerusalem, that's a real place, and we have the Bible that says this and the Bible that says that. But that's not really evidence, right? Like that's not evidence. There's all sorts of books written by human beings throughout the course of history that include real people in real places, but never really happened. And without any tangible evidence that you can definitively say, like, oh, yep, this mark here on the ground, we can prove that that's the moment that God said, let there be light, and a bolt of lightning came, and all of a sudden the light came, right? Like, without some things like that, there's no definitiveness as to the existence of God, and therefore you can't definitively know for sure. And that's what makes you agnostic. It's not a denial of existence, it's just the lack of evidence of existence, right? um it's in that way, it's absurd for people to say, well, God definitely does not exist. And the reason why that's absurd is because you would have to have the proof to say does not exist. But you can't prove a negative. You cannot prove the non-existence of something. That's just not a thing. You just can't do it. So it's a blatant absurdity, and it's an act of injustice for people who are non-believers to thrust that upon believers in any way, shape, or form.
Alrighty. That is it for the questions. Do you have anything else to add?
Um, no, I mean, I guess the one thing I would have to add is just, um, for everybody, believers or non-believers alike, to just do a better job at being better people. Um, it's hard enough to live a human life, and so people suffer from hunger, people suffer from pain. There's suffering throughout the world, and it's a bummer for other people to place that or to increase that within people, whether it's because you would disagree with them or not. um None of that's an excuse for making other people's lives worse than they need to. So
All right, everybody. Well, that concludes my questioning of agnostic. Um, as I have said in my previous video where I talked with my mom, um, I will come out with a couple more videos questioning some other people. I have one possibly with a chaplain in mind, another one with an atheist, and I will go into other religions and denominations as well. But those will have to wait as these videos do take time. Um, Remember, the reasoning I do these videos are so that we can see that you can have completely respectful conversations with people who don't believe the same things with you, but also with people who do believe the same things as you. It's important to know that we're all human beings and we are all valuable, so we're all on the same page here. Um, so yeah, I will see you all next time.